5% of the population plus is now under the age of 25 or whatever it is. They are the future. Well, we're now a decade on from that future. How do you see them having any influence in the discussions we're having today on normalization, security, etc.? So who'd like to leap in? Right, Robert first, and then we'll do it reverse order.
I think you raised an interesting point which links up to the last part of my presentation, which is why I'm anxious to address it. Because I think you can, the problems still remain, the conflicts are still in existence. And whether we're in a trend where terrorism is in the rise, or popular demonstrations are on the rise, or shifting political alliances are on the rise, these are all streams which ebb and flow and which are acutely interesting to study as a political scientist. But if you want to look at the problems themselves, the conflicts, they are rooted in deep historical injustices which are reflected in socioeconomic suffering from people. So looking at the attributes on the surface about what is capturing world attention, as I said, shifting alliances or popular demonstrations, they don't really address the problem of what's going on. They are a manifestation of the problem. And the shifting alliances is a manifestation of shifting power throughout the world. And those alliances are going to have an impact. But to what extent are they going to address the root causes of the conflict, I think remains to be a question that needs to be addressed.
Okay. Raffaella.
Yes, I think that I hinted at it in my talk. I think there is a real legitimacy problem of many governments and regimes in the region, which is not new, right? Not new at all. And obviously there are several developments that may increase this legitimacy deficit and problem. And I think that what we have seen, if we look at Iran, or I mean, even the Arab uprisings, right? I mean, it is basically that this issue that comes out, because states and governments, there is a growing divide between states and governments and the populations, no? And this divide is exacerbated, for example, can be exacerbated, for example, by Arab governments signing normalization deals with Israel without a resolution of the Palestinian issue, right? That increases also the divide between populations and governments. And obviously you can add to this the economic problems, which food insecurity rising. I mean, you mentioned Lebanon. Lebanon is in a terrible situation economically, right? Tunisia is not much better off, and so on and so forth, right? And so I think that this is a real problem that has to be addressed in one way or the other, and links back to what I was saying about security, right? If we're thinking about security only in terms of hard security, we're missing out something.
Please.
I think that the Arab Spring was a very sad experience for those who went to the streets and for the younger generations, because basically nothing dramatically has changed. And I see a very unpromising situation for those who protest today in Iran. The regime there is very much entrenched. They understood the morals of, or the lessons of the Arab Spring, and they will crush in the long run any opposition. I think, though, that the daily problems of food security, water, employment, and health, they will dominate the agenda, certainly in the region, if not also outside the region. And therefore, they are the potent problems for the regimes, how to deal with these current and forthcoming situations. And I do think that, come back to the point I made, this is where the organizations outside, whether the economic, like the World Bank, IMF, and others, plus NATO, the EU, can help in trying to organize and somehow get regional cooperation on these issues to try and mitigate the consequences of a coming problem.
Do you have anything to contribute or follow?
I think it's very difficult to generalize the Arab world. Situation is different between Bahrain and Mauritania, and both are members of the Arab League. But I think there are certain issues, of course, need to be addressed, whether it's the internal political system or political participation or the socio-economic issues, or also the external intervention, because do not undermine the external intervention sometimes have played a negative role and not really a positive role. When the US forces went to Iraq, we thought liberation will be there. But have they really liberated Iraq and kept Iraq united? Or they have allowed Iran for a stronger intervention in Iraq and expansion of Iran's spheres of influence there? Unfortunately, we've seen Iranian intervention in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen. And in Syria, we understand that their intervention has been addressed either by the Israeli forces or by the local domestic resistance there. So external intervention also play a role, whether it's negative or positive, it depends in which country and how so. But we cannot generalize it, and we need to look at the specificity of the country and what are the issues that relate. For instance, the economic suffering in some of the Gulf countries, we don't have that problem. But post-Arab uprising, or the Arab Spring as they call it, the Gulf countries stood together and kept their interests together simply because they have a similar political system, society are close to each other, and normalization, whatever economic support they needed between them, it was exchanged, and it did work, in a better way.
Okay, we've got half an hour left. I've got one more burning question to ask, and then I'll be opening up to all of you. So are there roving microphones in the room? How do we organise this? Sorry, I'm going to have to put my glasses on. So as and when. So if you can prepare your questions, I'll be coming to you shortly. But I can't resist saying, it's partly you that's provoked this, Abdulaziz, but we've heard about the absolute dire poverty, dire straits, penury across the region, yet the Gulf states, I understand, are due to earn them so collectively about $3.5 trillion because of the rising oil and gas prices. I mean, Qatar has a whole strategy for developing, and it's just coming on stream, isn't it, the North gas field. I think the underlying question is, if we are looking at a region that's standing on its own 2 feet more, my first question, but I have a follow-up, is, to what extent can we genuinely see an interest in some of this money that's being generated going into the positive side of what's going on in the region, which is encouraging young people who have, that in previous generations, been very dependent on the state to actually set up their own businesses, to actually solve some of the climate issues, to actively become engaged in solving these issues. And the second part of the question is, it seems to me, in a positive way, the region is also now getting involved in some conflict resolutions of security issues themselves. And I'm thinking, particularly as a Brit, to ask you about the role of Saudi Arabia in the hostage liberation situation. The British, mostly British, weren't they? Hostages taken by the Russians were with Saudi intervention. We've never quite understood what the dynamics were, but amazingly, despite everybody else's efforts, it was the Saudi intervention that actually got those hostages released. So what's behind initiatives like that outside the region, and what about the changing dynamics within the region, which isn't just geopolitical in nature, but also could stabilize the region if more of the largesse coming your way was actually going to be spread around more?
Thank you, Claire, for the question. I think on the first part of your question, the region is still committed to support countries whom they are suffering from poverty or they have a difficult economic situation.
Yes.
I believe countries like Jordan and Morocco, post the Arab uprising or the Arab Spring, have received each one close to 10 billion support from each one from the different GCC country, and the GCC country still committed and remain committed to support those countries whom they have difficulty. The problem is we need to have more transparency. We would like to see where is the money is going, who is going to use it, how is the utilization of such fund. This is why people thought, for instance, in the case of some of the other, stronger, very important country for us is Egypt. We don't want to see any difficulty in the economic situation in Egypt, because Egypt is a very vital on the whole region security, of course, and also on the whole Arab world. So, but still there was a very clear direction. Whatever goes into the central bank to support the Egyptian pound and the rate of exchange will go there, whatever it goes as an investment. And now they are taking more the approach of investment, looking at a viable project, focusing on the investment, but still yet support that one. So without having a better local governance in those countries, it will be difficult. For instance, all of the Gulf countries, hands off Lebanon. We cannot support such a regime and such a situation there. On your second question with regard to the Saudi mediation for the hostage, it came originally as a British request. So it started from there, and then Saudi felt they can use their leverage between Ukraine and Russia to help on the release of the hostage, which was quite successful. Most of the hostage, by the way, left back in their home, with the exception last week, one of the Swedish hostages, he was suffering from some illness, and he was treated at the hospital. And there was one Moroccan who wanted to stay some more days in Saudi to perform, Umrah in the holy Mecca and Medina, and so. But the rest have been released. But the message we get from the Russia: thank you very much for your mediation. That's it. We don't want any more mediation. So it looks like the Russians are still on the process of continuing what they are doing. And if we listen to the news this morning, it looks like the Russians still are determined to continue in whatever they are doing in Ukraine, unfortunately, there.
So there's no role in a peace process between...
No, I think there has been a talk about Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, but all these three countries, they said, unless we are accepted by the Russian, and the Russian, they would like to see such a role, we cannot, impose it, into them. But when is the Russian are going to reach to that point where they would like to see mediation and a serious mediation to help, we have to wait and see.
Absolutely. Right, has anyone got a burning contribution? If not, I will now open up to the floor, and perhaps you could absorb that within... Now, can I see anybody? Can you raise your hands? I'm sorry, I'm going to go beyond the first row, because from the back... Who's waving at the back? Yes? Is that you wishing to intervene, Alessandro? Sorry, favoritism here.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Alessandro Politi, the director of the Foundation. I would like to pose a question concerning an impending major economic crisis that is foreseen by a number of economists by the end of this year. How do you think this will impact on the balances of the region? Thank you very much.
Are you talking about a global economic crisis, global
indeed.
Recession? Okay. Has anyone got any questions on that sort of... Right, the gentleman in the second row, and then I will come to the first row, and then I'll hand them over.
Good afternoon. My name is Carlo Trezza. I would like to come back to the question of liquid alliances with regard to the position of Arab states vis-à-vis the Ukrainian crisis. I think last July, Foreign Minister Lavrov, Russian Foreign Minister, praised the balanced position of, I think, the Arab League countries on the Ukrainian crisis. Now, being balanced in a situation in which there is an aggressor and a victim of an aggression is not very balanced, in my view. So I was wondering, what is is there really a common position of Arab states on this issue, and in particular whether the panel believes that they can buy the claim by Mr. Putin that Russia is running an existential threat which would allow them to use nuclear weapons, actually. Thank you.
Oh yes, you've forgotten. I was going to raise something on the nuclear issue. Would the gentleman on the front row like to complete? So you'll have 3 questions. Recession, economic recession, balanced alliances.
Thank you. My name is Ahmed Masaadi. Thank you very much for your interventions. So we had now a very murky overview of the region, which is not unfamiliar. I believe that in as much as we try to intercept with regional approaches, the problem lies within the infrastructure of the region and each country, and unless that we have proper political reforms inside those countries, no matter what we try to do from the outside, the effect will be limited. I have a question to Professor Del Sarto. I think that you ended with a very interesting concept, the human security, and I would like to hear more about that. Also, I'm not sure about the issue of legitimacy if you look at it in a legal term in terms of the Arab countries, because the regimes are there and they are legitimate. However, probably if we look at legitimacy in a different context, in the sense that business cannot be done with the old tools, i.e. no governance, no freedoms, no human rights, no political reforms, probably we can have some issues there in terms of legitimacy. But I'm very much interested to hear more about the human security issue, and also as an academic, if you would advise NATO and European governments about what should they do in terms of tackling the human security issue in the region, what would you advise them? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, one specific question, several general ones. Are you ready, Raffaello, or shall we start with the others? Okay, who wants to go first?
Okay, I think the question of the balanced approach in the Arab country. First, they look at it that the Ukraine-Russian, it's more on the European side and not in the territory. So they believe Europe and the NATO can deal with that issue problem. But second, we were not the only one who took a balanced approach. India took a balanced approach. China took a balanced approach. Turkey took a balanced approach in that one. The question today, and we have constantly said, no, we need to the unity of Ukraine, and there is no way that we are supporting the fragmentation of Ukraine. In my opinion, the question now, which the region will be concerned about, and this is how we're going to see the different reaction, is the secondary sanction if it's going to be imposed. That will be the big concern. For instance, the secondary sanction was imposed in Iran. You see, I can't deal with Iran because I can't use the IBAN, I can't do with this one. So although it was a US sanction, it was some was a UN sanction, but secondary sanction will be very important, particularly for the country in the region as an oil exporter, as a dollar-based countries, and so that will be an extremely important. In the long term, we don't have a strategic relation with Russia, by the way. Russia is a producer of raw material like us. We have minerals, they have minerals. We have oil and gas, they have oil and gas. But it's not really a strategic relation. Our security comes from the West, practically. Our economic ties goes to the East because 65% of our energy export to Asia, primarily 4 countries, China, Russia, China, India, Japan, South Korea. So to keep that sort of balanced approach, I think we're getting to the point where it's changing gradually, and you might see it quite soon.
Have you anything to say on a global economic recession?
We don't want a global economic recession. We are a producer of an oil. We want to see development. We wanted to.
Well, I was
we
about
don't
to
want
say
to
the forecasts for you are very good, and not for the rest of us. Oded.
I would like to answer your question now to my colleague here, and the question on the food or the global crisis
Yes.
influence on our region. The wars in the Middle East, those that pertain to Israel and its neighbors, the immediate cause was territory. The immediate, I'm not speaking about the more profound reasons. Can you imagine what will the situation in the Middle East look like when we start to fight about wheat, about water, about other commodities which influence our daily life? It's all connected. Saudi Arabia, for example, and even Jordan, with the vast areas, arid areas, could be transformed with water. They could become baskets of growing wheat. If we combined forces to desalinate seawater, transform it, transmit it to these arid areas, we are not talking about thousands of kilometers. We are talking about short distances that they can give certainly a partial solution to the crisis that we already see. See what happens with the wheat. And this is just an example. The Middle East is a net importer of basic foods. So cooperation in this respect, where it's possible, is necessary.
Okay, very good point. Robert, you listed all the crises, so...
Yeah, I think the Ukraine crisis is really bringing to the fore a developing trend that has been going on for some time. We were talking earlier about the decline of the power and interest of the US in the Middle East, which is already a big subject of debate in itself, but I think it's pretty clear in terms of what is being said, less so in what is being done, but certainly in terms of what is being said, that the US has decided, and it decided back with Barack Obama, but has only recently started to take more concrete steps towards this pivot to Asia. But I think the Middle East is, when we talk about balancing its alliances, it's doing exactly that, saying, well, if we're not 100% sure that the United States is going to be here to protect us, we have to find other strategic partners. It turns out that Russia might not yet be a geopolitical strategic partner of most countries in the region, although it is, as we see in a country like Syria, where the conflict is still ongoing. But I think that there are other interests as well. Trade is an important one, and food commodities is by far the most important in terms of keeping political stability in the country. And as one knows, there's a direct function between the price of bread and political stability in many Middle Eastern countries. And let's call it weapons, too. It's a huge market for Russian weapons and their support. The impact of a global economic crisis we're already seeing in the Middle East, insofar as I can speak certainly about the humanitarian situation, that there is not only less attention, which I talked about in my remarks, but there's less money available for support and humanitarian works. And many of my colleagues in the humanitarian field are complaining that not only has the economic crisis worsened because of the focus on the Ukraine crisis, but this ensuing global economic crisis is going to have a huge financial impact in the amount of money that donors which have traditionally supported Middle Eastern countries is going to diminish.
Okay, thank you, Robert. So, Raffaella, have you got your evidence marshaled and your recommendations ready?
Right, yeah, it was always the easy questions. Perhaps to your first or to your second question on political legitimacy. I mean, first of course, it varies from country to country, right? I mean, the Middle East, as we have been saying, is not a monolithic bloc. But I just, I do wonder how many of the governments were in power if the citizens had the right to vote, right? And as I was saying, that there are, in some countries, certainly the legitimacy is also provided or has been reinforced by saying we protect you from terrorists, for example, and we provide stability that maybe increase the legitimacy of some governments in the eyes of the citizens, but certainly there is a legitimacy problem, particularly if you have worsening socioeconomic conditions, right? And on the issue of human security, I mean, that is a concept that has been much discussed. I mean, there were a lot of discussions about this concept 10, 15 years ago, and then somehow it disappeared, right? It's yeah. Mm-hmm. It is basically it's a way of looking at security from a different angle. It's basically by focusing on individuals, on the people, basically. And it includes being free of want, it includes the right to a decent living, it includes a right to personal security, not being killed on the street because of a civil war, because of your government not liking you or anything. It has also to do with a safe environment, and education plays also a role in that, right? Now, how do you tackle human security? Well, in a way, it is linked to the idea of sustainable development, right? So if you think about sustainable development, human security in terms of sustainable development, you would basically give the advice to governments to say, okay, you have to focus on these aspects, you have to invest in this kind of elements of sustainable development. To the Europeans in particular, I would say, well, perhaps you have to rethink your trade relations, right? Which has a lot to do also with excluding agriculture from free trade provisions, for example, which is very important for many states in North Africa in particular, and the Middle East. So this is basically more or less the advice I would give. Really think, and it has also to do with accountability of governments. It has also to do with political reforms in some countries. Now, how much the Europeans can do or other external actors, that's of course a very tricky one, because the appeal of the Europeans or of the United States, for that matter, has a bit diminished in the region. And to say we support you if you do ABC, and there are other actors which basically support you with no strings attached, so it makes it a bit difficult, no? But I think that accountability is certainly one important aspect that should re-enter the discussion.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've got time for a few more questions. So, good. These special glasses tend to see the hands of women faster than they do men. So there's a woman in the row. Where's the roving mic? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Back. Any other women? I will come to. Okay. Second row, hello, how are you? And first row afterwards. So over to you first, and then we'll come to you, sir, as well. In fact, why don't you come straight afterwards, since the microphone's there? Okay. Special concession. Right.
Hello, I'm Anna. I'm a student of MENA region. And I wanted to ask you, Robert, how do you see, as a peace-building expert, the third party, as the Arab League, and the second party as Israel. But in this scenario, I see the local presence of the first party. That is, in this case, Palestinian people and civil Palestinian people. How do you see a negotiation with two-state solution, in this case, where there is no negotiation from this party, the first party, or the Palestinian people? And the second question that I wanted to do is, how do you see the role of US in disengagement politics with Iran and the strategic alliance with Israel in this scenario? And which will be the possible negotiation? And as you said, I don't see a long-term negotiation and a short-term negotiation and a short-term peace building for this conflict. Thank you.
Okay. If you could pass the mic just along the row, we'll take that one. And then we have a wonderful interloper, 2 rows in front of you. I'll take after you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lorenzo. I'm a IR and security student at Lewis University. And I had a question for Mr. Sagar. I was wondering what his thoughts about Qatar's possible role as a mediator between Saudi and Iranians relations, with reference to Qatar previously having been very close with Saudi and having shifted towards an Iranian approach, and with reference to the blockade and the resolution to the blockade. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you put your hand up again if you wanted? Sorry, the lady in the middle. You were waving at me. No, not waving anymore. Right, so coming over here then, please. Oh, okay, right, new one. Off you go, yes. Then we'll come to this side.
Good afternoon, I'm Umayma Hubbadi, and I'm a student, an IR student from the American University of Rome. So mine is pretty much a basic question, and it's a summary of everything that you said. Thank you for your time, first of all. So you mentioned that, from what I understood, that food security and energy security, and if so, state security, are all based within bilateral agreements and have, different relationships with different states to rely on. So my question is, how do you think, is it mainly an actual regional problem, issue that should be solved, or is it within the local government that each state has to deal with in order for them to actually build, from what I understand, multilateral relationships that could reach to have food security within the region, within the MENA region, and if so, how? Thank you.
Okay, some big questions so far. Right, moving over here, please. Is there more than one mic? Yes, we're coming to you next. So after second row, Claudia, please.
Hi, I'm Claudia Gazzini from the International Crisis Group. Claire, just a point of clarification, since you mentioned us in your opening remarks. We are not promoting an Arab NATO. We
mentioned it. It was criticised by IC. Yeah, it's not a.
Sorry,
sorry if it sounded like that. No, I heard it. It was actually discussed in an International Crisis Group, ICG paper.
Exactly. Yes. So I just wanted to clarify.
Right, not a promotion.
We questioned the myth. In fact, we call it the myth of an Arab NATO. In the sense that we note there's an eagerness on the Israeli side to push for this, a cold reaction by Gulf capitals, which we fully understand and embrace, and we note that perhaps, the only realistic way forward is to increase, as the Gulf capitals have been doing, dialogue, and this is, what we essentially support.
Oh, it was a clarification, not a question.
Yes.
Right. Sorry, the front row, if you're wandering off with the gentleman. I think it's the ambassador.
Thank you. My name is Mahmoud Karim. Congratulations for the panelists for an excellent kickoff, actually, of this event. I just want to set the record straight on the issue of human security, because as an old multilateralist UN, I think this concept was introduced to the United Nations more than 15 years ago. And the problem was not with the issue of human security as such, but it was an issue with the definition on what you mean by security and what you mean by humanitarian. Now, having said that, it later on became linked to another issue, which is a humanitarian intervention. And so we, as multilateralists working at the United Nations at the time, were at loss. We were not really sure how you started, or whoever started with humanitarian security and ended up with humanitarian intervention. So this was the issue at the time, and it still remains until today, because it harbors very well and encroaches on the issue of legitimacy. The second point is to thank my dear colleague Odette Oran for mentioning the names of 4 people who worked very hard in friendship over many years in NATO to push, start, and make sure the success of the Mediterranean dialogue at very difficult times. I just want to add something to what you said about desalination. I think there is a good project going on in Oman between you and the Omanis on water management, which I think is rather interesting in this regard and fits very well into what you said. My last question is to my dear friend Abdelaziz. If you wish to answer or if you wish to ignore it, please do not ever think that I mean to embarrass you by that. But I know from my own sources, and my sources may be corrupt, but I know that there are talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And these talks have taken place once in Iraq, and will be taking very soon another phase of talks in another Arab country close to Iraq. I will not mention the name. And I don't know if you wish to comment on this issue, because I think it fits well with the panel. Thank you.
Okay, so that's all questions, quite a diversity. So I think what I'll do is, in reverse order that you've spoken, actually ask you to answer whichever you'd like to and sum up. So Robert, first.
Thank you,
ready
Claire.
for it? Yeah.
I see we have 4 minutes left.
Everyone's watching this great
Well,
talk.
I have to apologize. I didn't completely grasp the question that was directed towards me about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I will do what every other speaker does, which is I will turn around and tell you what I would like to say about that, which is something that I neglected to make in my presentation. There was something very positive which has come out in that conflict recently, which is that the caretaker Prime Minister of Israel, Yair Lapid, said that he believed in a two-state solution. Well, it's unfortunate that he's a lame duck Prime Minister, but it's still a nice thing to hear coming from Israel that there are some Israeli politicians who still believe in it. Nonetheless, I still believe that there won't be a solution to that conflict until there is an end of the occupation and a two-state solution. The other side of the equation, though, on the Palestinian side, is that you have a lame duck president. And here's a perfect example of a leader who is not legitimate. I think if we want to talk about legitimization, insofar that he has been without a process of legitimization through voting in a so-called democratic state. So I think those are the two problems. The U.S. also is saying that the current circumstances are not ripe for negotiations. Even though there was always calls for negotiations, they do not believe that's going to happen. And if that is coming from the United States, that means nothing is going to happen, at least until there is the elections take place in Israel and hopefully one day in Palestine. Regarding the Iran situation, again, there's not enough time for me to go into that, but I think that the fact that there is this political crisis taking place in Iran right now is a good thing, not only for Iran and Iranians, but I think could have a positive impact on some of the other conflicts in the region, whether it be in Lebanon, and is the lack of support coming from Iran to Hezbollah because of their weakening of the state, has that contributed to finding a solution to the maritime crisis? Nobody knows, but I think a weakening of Iran will certainly play out in many positive ways throughout the region, Syria being another one. So I would just stop.
Thank you. I'm going to skip to Oded because of the mention of Israel-Palestine. So you wanted to say something?
I would just want to add to Robert. As a graduate of the process between the Israelis and Palestinians, including Camp David, I would say that my lesson from these attempts is that overall, binary solution, 0 or 1 or 0, doesn't work. We need to change the paradigm and to move to a step-by-step towards the two-state solution. That is to say, we can build a gradual process in which we take both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, take concrete steps, not solving immediately all the three core issues, Jerusalem, borders, refugees, this is not going to work. We need to move gradually and slowly by agreement towards the two-state solution. But that takes leadership on both sides, Israelis and Palestinians. It takes some external involvement, Europe as well, not just the United States. And that is a very complicated situation to reach, given the political and personal problems of leadership in both sides, and the world attention to other issues other than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Thank you very much. Sorry?
No,
well, actually,
no,
I
not
was
necessarily.
a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down one,
Right.
which actually might be a paradigm for other aspects of our discussion today. Right, we're in zero time. I'm sorry about that, not your fault. So Rafaela first and Abdulaziz, you have nothing to add? Or
No, just very quickly.
We got 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes.
Oh, right, we've got
Oh, we
3
have
more
another
minutes
3
max.
minutes.
So
We're-
you
we're
have got time.
negotiating here.
Abdulaziz, end on an optimistic note. You've been asked to...
She
You've
has-
thought of something. Right, off you go.
No, just very quickly to reply to the ambassador. You are absolutely right that the concept of human security was then linked to humanitarian intervention, and that developed then also the responsibility to protect and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean that the concept is no longer valid, right? I mean, I think that we certainly have to detach the concept itself from the way it has been used. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
1
There are
minute
3
52.
parts, in my
Yes.
opinion, here in the question. One with regard to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The Saudi and the Arab League have called for a meeting in New York, and it was attended by the 27 different, including the UN, the Arab League, the OIC, the GCC, different international. But the most important is the European. And the EU had a similar position like us, which is the two-state solution, but a viable two-state solution.
Yeah.
So, and we still believe that is really the answer for that one. How to go about it, what to do. We've always endorsed and support the quadrant, to have the continuous and so. From our end as a Saudi, we have done the maximum we can do at this stage with Israel. We can't move further unless we see peace there, then we can normalize. The question of Qatar, I tell you honestly, Qatar have played a significant roles historically on the mediation. Some of it was quite successful, some of it was not successful, including from Abu Sayyaf in Philippines to all the way in Latin America, from the Sudanese to the Eritrean also conflict. So they have played a significant roles, and still they are doing a significant role when it comes to Afghanistan and the US and so. Are we using them now? I myself have been involved in track 2 with the Iranian, just to answer Ambassador Mahmoud on that one, between March 23 to November 2019. And so it was a long period. And the former boss of the International Crisis Group, Bob Mali, my good friend, we've done almost 9 meetings together with the Iranian and Saudi and everybody there. Yes, we moved from track 2 to track 1. Track 1 now, there was 5 meetings took place in Iraq. The other country you're talking about is Oman, and Oman is welcoming very much, the discussion there as a platform to bring. They have discussed everything could be discussed in terms of security and intelligence, and that side. I think where we are today, Iran would like to start by a diplomatic relation. We don't know at which level, whether it's a consul general or a DCN or it's an ambassador level. Saudi Arabia still believe there are crucial issues like Yemen in particular, and the Iran interventionist role in Yemen need to be discussed before we believe in that. But last meeting we've had, by the way, it was last month in Montreux in Switzerland, with the support of the German and the Swiss both. They were attending, and official representation from each one of the 6 GCC states attended the meeting. And basically, we are not against any direct talk. We are not against any negotiation. But we would like to understand that the Iranian cannot get carried away with their own security agenda in the region without taking in account, our concern also. And, just for the sake of the discussion, because of their policy, it brought the region and Israel agenda toward Iran equal. We both perceive it as the main threat to the region. And that's because of the threat they use, closing the Strait of Hormuz, the maritime issue, the support of the militia, the extension in Iraq, and we have seen now what they have been doing in Kurdistan, in Syria. Israeli, they don't talk about how many attacks they have attacked the Iranian military presence in Syria. Neither the Iranian declare it, because the Iranian, they don't want to feel embarrassed with that one. In Lebanon with Hezbollah. So all of that, it's not acceptable. If they want to live in peace in the region, they have to respect the sovereignty of the region. They have to respect they should change their attitude of the interventionist and using sectarianism as a dimension of expansion. That's also will never be acceptable.
Well, maybe that will come up in the next session. Thank you very much for this panel. And as often is the case, as you might expect, we have a coffee break now. And I'm sorry the time has been slightly curtailed, but you are requested to be back here in 20 minutes. So that's at 20 to 5, I believe, 16:40. So cup of coffee, enjoy. See you later.
Thank you.
Well done, thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our second session. I'm Ian Lesser from the German Marshall Fund of the United States in Brussels, and it's really a great pleasure to be here again in person after quite some time. My great thanks to the foundation and to Alessandro and the whole staff. We had a number of references in our first session to the Abraham Accords. And in many ways, I suppose they're emblematic of many of the things that we're talking about, but we can discuss that. But we have a wonderful group of people here to help us discuss this afternoon. And let me just mention who they are briefly to you. We have Nasser al-Baluchi, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Bahrain to Italy. Thank you for joining us. Ambassador designate, actually, to be perfectly accurate, Alon Bar, Ambassador of Israel designate to Italy. Mahmoud Karem, at the end, professor at the British University in Cairo, but a former ambassador to the EU and to NATO. And Dr. Abdeslam Al...
Who's not ambassador.
Not ambassador.
Yeah.
No?
She's better than ambassador.
No, better than ambassador. No, I know Dr. Abdesalam Al-Khatbi. As a doctor, I can say this anyway. But president and founder of the Emirates Policy Center in Abu Dhabi. So it's a great group. Two things occurred to me before we get to our comments. The first is that if we were having this discussion 5 or 10 years ago, and we were presenting as a kind of thought experiment the contents of the Abraham Accords, people would say this is radical, unrealistic, don't be silly. We've, in a way, gotten rather used to this concept. It's become normalized over the last 2 years, but maybe we should remind ourselves that it was quite an accomplishment, actually. The second thing that I would mention is really a question. How much of it is about the region and these relationships, and how much it was about the broker and feelings about the United States? An open question, but I'm sure we'll get to that. Ambassador Baluchi, perhaps we could start with you to share some thoughts very briefly with us.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this great audience and great speakers. As you know, 2 years have elapsed since the official diplomatic relationship has started between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the State of Israel. And we will reflect on the success of such an agreement which has been made. The Kingdom of Bahrain has signed on signing of Abraham Accords Declaration 15th of September 2020 emanates from the fact that of His Majesty's vision that he stresses on the importance of promoting peace rather than war in the region, and promote stability, prosperity in the Middle East as a whole. Bahraini foreign policy and domestic policy emanates from three core values. The first one is peace, second one is human rights, and then sustainable development. Those are the three pillars of our policies that we have adopted and we stressed upon. The second thing, we have signed so far around 42 agreements and memorandum of understanding in different fields. Name it, because we just started, we have to sign a lot of things. There are 15 agreements and memorandum of understanding in pipeline, has to be. And there is one important issue which is very important. We are also negotiating a free trade agreement between the two nations to promote investment, like we did with the United States. We are doing it with the State of Israel. And I think it's an opportunity for us to seize all the, to show that peace will work and the benefits are there. In this regard, we have trade has increased by $17 million so far in 2 years. And I think the year to come will show a better increase also. And at the end of this October, there is a big delegation from Bahrain going to the State of Israel to make the relationship even deeper and better. Moreover, there are Israeli tourists now coming to Bahrain, and they are discovering the Arab nations. And there are also Bahrainis going to Israel and discovering Israeli nation. So there is communication between the two, thanks to direct flights. We have 3 direct flights from Bahrain to Tel Aviv. I think with regard to other nations that have signed free trade agreement, Abraham Accord, the benefits are today around $4 billion. So I think it's a big number, and the number will increase in the future. This clearly demonstrates the advantages and benefits of Abrahamic Accord. We think in order to promote this, we would like to see the Italian Parliament to promote what we call it Friends of Abraham Accord for Peace here with the new Parliament. And also it is an initiative that would enhance the importance of Abraham Accord, and we are ready to participate in such an event. I am sure the Ambassador of Israel will do that. And also we would like to see more friendship groups are active so that they can promote such kind of things with the Arab world, either with the Arab parliaments or consultative councils. It is important also for Israel to start negotiating a two-state solution, because it is one of the prime important matters that we consider. Mr. Lapid, this time in the United Nations, he declared that this is good for our security, for his security of his country, and for the economic development, etc. We also have to understand that the Arab countries are willing also to negotiate for a two-state solution. Actually, as he mentioned, Mr. Sagar today, he mentioned this morning about the Arab countries presided by Saudi Arabia and Mr. Joseph Borrell. They met in the United Nations, and they have stressed on this thing. It is important for Israel to do a two-state solution, because we will cut the lines for those terrorists and the terrorist state that sponsor terrorism in the region. And at the end of the day, Israel will benefit more than anybody else because they have more productive units that it can trade with the other Arab nations. So it's, in conclusion, Bahrain remains optimistic for endless possibilities of this relationship. And we are witnessing today that the benefits are clear and good for both nations. And I'm sure that the others, if they sign up to this Abrahamic Accord, which will be beneficial for them. And I conclude my saying, however, it is important to start a two-state solution with the Palestinian. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk.
Ambassador, thank you. Thank you very much. And you ended really precisely where I was going to turn to you, Ambassador Barr. Morocco, UAE, Bahrain, Sudan. What next? I mean, how significant is all of this? But what are the prospects to multilateralize it, to expand it perhaps, or maybe it's deepening? Anyway, share some thoughts.
Cool. Well, thank you for that, and thank you, Ambassador, for your words. I believe that, first of all, I want to say something personal, because before I came here, I was personally involved in the negotiation of the maritime border between Israel and Lebanon, and the news from this morning about the possibility, and even more than possibility, that an agreement has been achieved is very happy and important news for me. And personally, I think for Israel and Lebanon, and maybe also for stability in our region. But stability is an important word also in the context of the Abraham Accord. The Abraham Accord represent a significant change in the way we look at, and many people should look also at ourselves and our region, and the way we deal with the different challenges in that. I think for the first time, now it's 2 years, but it is for the first time that they give us an opportunity to look upon ourselves in the region, not only as different countries with different interests and the gaps between us, economical gaps, the differences of opinion, a region identified by many others as a region of conflict, and the conflict and interest that everybody has. None of that has disappeared, but we have the first, I think, opportunity to look at ourselves as a region which have common challenges and maybe also common interest, that cooperation can increase our ability to deal with them. Now, as I said, the differences, the conflicts, the challenges have not disappeared. And our cooperation, building our cooperation is and will continue to be accompanies with many difficulties that are related to countries that live and have to deal with so many challenges. But it is the first time that we have an opportunity, as I said, and the option to deal with them together. And I think the most important aspect of the decision, and with all respect and support for the mediator, but the most important decision made by Bahrain, by United Arab Emirates, by Morocco, was the decision that the boycotting Israel is no longer relevant for their ability to deal with the different challenges. And maybe, I dare say so, doesn't actually contribute in any way to solve the Israeli-Palestinian issue or help the Palestinians. And I think this was the most important decision that has been made, and I think it's important. Ambassador, you mentioned the things that we have been able to achieve in 2 years. Many really important agreements, visit of people, tens of thousands of Israelis are visiting and seeing both Bahrain and United Arab Emirates, the number of flights, and the people that come. I think tourism and knowing people from first-hand experience is extremely important. But probably one of the most important things is the Negev Summit and the Negev Forum, which is an agreement between these three countries, Morocco, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, and Israel and the United States, to create a group, a framework of actually 5 working groups that deal with the most important challenges that we have in our region and beyond. Okay, we talk about water and food security. We talk about climate and energy. We talk about tolerance and extremism. We talk about medical treatment. And yes, we also talk about regional stability. And it is high time for us to define our interest, our regional interest, not only through the mediation and the way they are being projected by NATO or by European Union or even by the United States. They are important, very important in each and any one of us. But we should define our interest, regional interest, by ourselves. And I think this is the most exciting and new element in this. We should, Ambassador, you mentioned it, we should and must show people in our region the benefit of this. For the people in Bahrain, for the people in Egypt, for the Palestinians. This is part of the importance of having and building relationship on all the issues to show all the people in the region the benefit of peace. And therefore, I don't see really the tension between deepening and implementing more actively the Abraham Accords and expanding them. If people will show the benefit of it, we'll be able to expand it. What will be next? There are several countries. I don't think that mentioning them will help us or them to arrive to where we want it. I do want to say something that I think, and again, the intention is that from this working group, the beneficiaries will be all the people in the region, including those who still do not have peaceful relationship with Israel, and definitely the Palestinians. Now, positive incentives are extremely important. But let's be honest, negative incentives are a lot more powerful. And negative incentive, the threats for our energy, the threat for our standards of life, and yes, the threat for our security is a very strong motivation for the effort that we have been trying to create in the region in the different framework and cooperation, and they bringing us closer to create an alternative on cooperation. And I think it's also important for NATO and the West to understand the importance of cooperation with this mega forum for this regional security and in the working group both of energy and food security, and understand the importance of regional. Now, when Iranian drones are being used in order to attack Ukraine, we start seeing some concern of people in the West from the Iranian drones. But the fact of the matter that Iranian drones have been a threat to regional stability. They have been sold and used by both different terrorist organizations in our region, and Iranian themselves attacking Bahrain, attacking United Arab Emirates, attacking Saudi Arabia. And let's be honest here, the support that we had in order to try to deal with it was limited. So I think it is important for the West also to understand that we need to strengthen our cooperation. Our own regional security, straight and very, very closely related to the security of NATO and the countries in this region. And I believe that in a very strong way, it is also the key to understand us, to talk with us, and to understand better our concern and try to see how to meet them for stability in the global sense, including in this region. So thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed.
Most important thing, 7 minutes on the dot.
You're all extremely precise. You're also doing something else which was totally unplanned, which is that you end right where I want to start with the next person, right? But maybe, Dr. Al-Ketti, I can turn to you and ask you, sort of your assessment, but also this question about, how significant these accords are, but secondly, how does it relate to the bigger world, or how does it relate to Middle Eastern security as a whole, NATO interests, the assumptions embedded in it about what the United States will do in the future? There's a whole set of bigger questions. Anyway, that or anything else you'd like to mention in 7 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. Delighted to be with you here. Now, 2 years on, the Abraham Accords have proved new dynamics in the Middle East under the banner of cooperation between Arab countries and Israel. And it has contributed towards building a new understanding of regional partnership. This is something new in the region. The strategic momentum built by Abraham Accords has shaped the contours of regional geopolitics. It occupies the space in debate on regional security and integrated projects in sectors as energy, technology, trade, security, defense, health, tourism, name it. It seems that empowering regional solution and approaches will be part of the Middle East new reality with the more visible American support, even though this new reality has not been taken in final shape, now I would say. On a new regional reality, Abraham Accords have contributed to creating, I would say, created new partnership in the region. The other thing, now, optimists believe that Abraham Accords has changed the rules of the game. I am one of them in the region. Even those disagreeing with this conclusion agree that the accords have created a new regional environment. However, this environment has not succeeded, at least so far, in ending this stalemate between in Palestinian and Israeli peace process, which for my country, that was not. It was de-escalating in the beginning, reaching to negotiation between Israeli and the Palestinians. Now, the Abraham Accords also introduced a cooperation project with strategic dimensions in the Gulf, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean, such as cooperation can reshape relation and forge new alliances and partnership among countries in the region. Now, moving Israel from the US-European commands, EUCOM, responsibility to CENTCOM is closely related to the signing of the UAE-Israel Peace Party. This consolidates the Abraham Accords transformational character and Israel regional integration. That was first sign of it. Now, the joint exercises, which include US, Arab countries, and Israel in the Red Sea and in the Gulf, point towards a new map of political relations in the Middle East. The security and political impact of the Abraham Accords are in the line with quiet shift of the US command is witnessing these days to enhance security cooperation with regional parties, which will eventually lead to military cooperation to advance collective security interests. The Abraham Accords are not, and from our point of view as Emirati at least, it's not against any country in the region, but instead every country can join that if this came from win-win formula, because this region plagued with crisis, with wars, and we had enough, and we cannot continue like that. So also, yes, there is a lack of consensus in this zero-sum formula, but we can be attributed to the large and deep conflict and historical conflicts in the region. Palestinians rejected that Abraham Accords. They could be one of those beneficiaries if they wanted. And also, this region, Middle East region, has not been able to manage the crisis, the conflicts, and the Abraham Accords can serve as a platform for de-escalating the tensions and promote regional cooperation. The last thing which I would like to conclude, 2 years of the Abraham Accord signing, these agreements have emphasized that regional countries, as Israeli ambassador said, need to tackle dispute in the Middle East by themselves. And they should not always look to the foreign powers to help resolve the regional conflicts. In this sense, the Abraham Accord partially reflected the burden-sharing strategy. The accords can help enhance security cooperation and harmonize security policies, plans between NATO and non-NATO countries in the Middle East, and even NATO observer member under the Istanbul Cooperation Middle East. So, therefore, the Abraham Accord also provides an opportunity to build a new and more effective security cooperation model between NATO and its partner and friends in the Middle East to serve mutual interests, if NATO wants to have a room in this accord. Thank you.
Dr. Al-Qibti, thank you very much for that. And you know, it continues our pattern really of leading into precisely the next comment, because let me turn to you, Ambassador Karim, for your assessment of the meaning, but also maybe even to say a little bit about what some of the limitations might be, which we haven't heard very much about yet. So over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me just begin by thanking Ambassador Milito for inviting me. Ambassador managed successfully to make this into an international global annual event. I thank you and your staff. A point of reminder, as an Egyptian who has worked for peace with Israel, I'm highly decorated by President Sadat for my role in Camp David and the peace accords. This is the symbol of decoration from the President. So of course, we are all for peace. We are all for these accords, and we are all for the expansion of new additional members for that. But moving to an assessment and salient facts, I would say that, of course, the accords are a very important symbol of tolerance and peaceful coexistence. They introduced a very important economic calculus for economic trade cooperation. To cite very briefly the case of Morocco, where several working groups have been established. However, one point, the states who signed these accords were not in a state of war with Israel. And finally, the accords would not have been possible without the catalytic role of the United States and diplomatic role, especially with the United Arab Emirates, the sale of F-35s, and recognizing the Western Sahara with Morocco and so on. This has been done with the Egyptian-Israeli peace talks at one point, when the United States successfully convinced the Israelis to withdraw from a far eastern part from Yamit and from several military installations at the time, and the compensation, if I remember correctly, of more than $1.3 billion was paid because of the insistence of Sadat at the time to receive every single inch. But now, as an academic, let me just give a different picture, which I may not subscribe to, but at least this is what we keep reading in editorials and so on, and it is important to invoke at this state. The main issue as we see it is that how the accords can turn around to withstand the test of time, not to become a cold peace, and become a people-to-people agreement rather than a government-to-government series of investment and trade agreements. We should remember what the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia said, that the peace comes at the end of the process and not at the beginning. Number two, the accords, in my view, and those who wrote these articles, should have a role, become a vehicle for conflict resolution and peacemaking, and I think the speakers have censured that. Opponents argue that the accord should have expedited a permanent, just, and lasting solution, but it didn't. It diluted the Palestinian problem, as well as sidestepped the Arab consensus on the 1982 Arab Initiative launched in Beirut, Lebanon by Saudi Arabia. Incursions, incidentally, into Gaza and settlements predicament and so on, and the monthly or the Friday prayers in Al-Quds create for Israel's Arab partners in the Accords a very delicate, embarrassing position with their own public opinion. And recent polls show that. I met in my office a few days ago a visiting Palestinian delegation, and of course he was very vocal about the Accords, telling me that the Accord forced them to lose their in-depth Arab backbone of support, did not stop the daily killings, nor did it convince Israel to move on the peace front. They heard from me that in return, I expect the Palestinian division, discord, and factionalism to end. One major dilemma, again, in my view, comes from prioritizing the security threat from Iran, or the so-called existential threat, which I think is very important and I agree to. In the long run, Arab dynamics may eventually reveal that the Gulf states need a policy of coexistence with their own regional partner in Iran. And not all Arabs share the same view towards Iran. Actually, there is an intra-Arab variable geometry or speed, such as in the case of Oman and Iraq. Incidentally, there was a vote yesterday in the Arab League in which the Iraqi delegation was the only delegation in the Arab League to say no to a resolution condemning Iranian bombing of parts of northern Iraq, only yesterday. So these proponents have argued that the Accords may further tension, provoke Iran, and may even instigate an unnecessary war. There are three critical assessments by the Accords. One is that, of course, security was not the driver of normalizing ties with Israel, and of course, there were increased military cooperation, which I think is very important, and I am for it. Naval exercises in the Red Sea coordinated with the US fleet based in Manama. The United Arab Emirates bolstering its air defense system with purchases and so on, drones, legitimately so because, of course, of drones coming from Yemen. But fear Iran's increasing precise military and armed drones, the security relationship with Israel can be, perhaps in the future, this is not my opinion, this is what I read from articles, may become a burden for the Gulf members. For Israel, the normalization could prove to be lucrative for its own defense industries, which develop some of the world's most advanced military technologies. The second criticism comes from Mr. Amr Moussa himself, who spoke on September 9th of this year in Doha, saying that he does not believe that these accords should lead into an Arab NATO, invoking Article 5 or its like will draw the region into extra-regional conflict and will contradict the League of Arab States Common Defense Treaty. He argued that the security implications of such a step will be controversial, contravening with Arab non-aligned principles, and that the security implications of this will lead to wars by proxy, where Arabs should not be involved in the first place. And the third criticism came actually from the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar himself, who stated just on the 14th of September, a few weeks ago, in a big conference in Kazakhstan, before world religious leaders, that dialogue between religions will lead to eternal peace between people and should be enunciated. However, he cautioned against merging all religions into one, which in his view would be disastrous. The implicit hint to the Abraham's Accord in such a statement was very clear. Finally, possible areas of cooperation beyond trade and investment where NATO can help through its respected departments could be allow its public diplomacy to hold a series of events. The Mediterranean Dialogue and the Istanbul Initiative were highly augmented by such a series. Could the NATO Regional Center, ICI, based in Kuwait, have a role? A plethora of issues can be considered as cyber warfare, desalination, information sharing on terrorism by establishing shared databases, hydroculture, water management, and so on, even on missile defense and drones exercise. The NEGA forum, I think, is extremely important, and I think the foreign minister of Egypt only a few days ago augmented, praised the statement by the Prime Minister of Israel in the General Assembly when he said that this was a very important initiative in this regard, and the hearing from the Prime Minister of Israel that the two-state solution was possible was actually welcomed by the Foreign Minister of Egypt. I want just to conclude with a fair descriptive analysis, and I would like to conclude with this. Partnership, in my view, makes it less necessary to deploy force. Partnership, in my view, is a peace builder, which I totally support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ambassador, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, I think before we open this up, let me just say a word and maybe put a question to you all. I mean, I think in different ways you all made, with slightly different nuance, an interesting point too, really. One is that there's a degree of self-interest from all sides in this, which is part of what has driven it along. But also, I think there are certain, and tell me if you disagree, certain embedded assumptions about the future in this that drove it along too. Assumptions about the US role as a guarantor, as a presence in the region for the future, assumptions about Iran, assumptions about the way in which global geopolitics was likely to evolve. Lots of things perhaps were driving this, in addition to this catalytic effect, as you say, of the US as a broker. And so maybe I could just ask you about that broader set of things. What's the assumption embedded in there? Is it that things are going to get more insecure, more unstable, partners like the United States less predictable? Or is that not such a factor in this? Maybe we can just go along. Whoever would like to pick up on it, please.
I think, I mean, sometimes the declaration of the politician does not really express the reality of things. The United States, for example, they have the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain since almost now 70 years. And their role was the flow of oil before the Iranian Revolution and after, until now. Because of their presence there, the flow of oil and gas to the rest of the world has been always in a very stable way. So will they withdraw themselves, the Americans? They will not do it. And of course, the Europeans also has found that this region is extremely important, and therefore they have also made a presence. For example, Britain has got their presence also in Bahrain, a naval presence. And then the French are present also in United Arab Emirates. They have a naval base there. And also the Italians, they have some naval base, and they started to increase their presence. So, I mean, the region is indirectly protected. And of course, we as nations, the Gulf countries, they have developed over time. They have seized the opportunity of oil and gas, and they developed themselves. And they are continuing to do so, to become one of the important, whether it is in manufacturing or in services or in, I mean, if you look at the Gulf countries, they are now, they complement each other. And I don't want to talk a lot, but I will leave the floor to the others. Absolutely. And the presence of Israel with us will definitely increase, especially the alliance that we have with them will definitely increase and make the region more stable and better equipped. I mean, from manufacturing point of view, from services point of view, from military point of view, strategic point of view, all will be better, because Israel is a country which has a great rate of innovation, and we can benefit a lot from such a country.
Dr. Al-Ketbi, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please. I mean,
I seriously think that what we've been trying to do in the last 2 years is precisely to create both interest and stability into something that is not totally dependent on the U.S. interest. More than 30 years ago, Adederan may remember this, we had the deputy foreign minister, whose name was Yossi Beilin. And we used to have a special meeting that we created all sorts of provocation, non-conventional ones. And we had a whole session, 3 hours, devoted to the question, what will happen if the United States lose interest in our region? And should we try to diversify Israel, political and military, etc.? So we've been dealing with this for more than 30 years.
What was the conclusion?
And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter. It was very open. The fact of the matter is that maybe not on energy, but the interest may shift. But at the end of the day, there were different points where people were saying, no, the American interest is lost. They're interested in that area, they're interested in that area. I think that the feeling that the American interests continue to be very important for us and to the rest of the country and the region is a stable one. It doesn't mean that we didn't have to work, and I think part of the Negev Forum intention was to try to impress on the American how concerned we are in the region about some of the policies adopted by the United States. And I think it was a successful one because it brought the interest and the willingness to invest more effort to try to meet our concern. So I see stability there. I don't see in the foreseeable future a loss of interest by the United States, but when I look at the United Arab Emirates' involvement in some of, and Bahrain and Egypt, I mean, when we took at the security interest related to Gaza of Egypt and Israel in the last 2 years, if you compare that to all the peace and the very important peace that we signed with Egypt, this was the most closer cooperation and understanding of mutual threat that we ever had. When we look at the United Arab Emirates' involvement in creating desalination plant to bring water to the Palestinian and Jordanian, and then energy, green energy fields in Jordan to supply electricity to Palestinian and Israelis, and their cooperation, United States, India, United Arab Emirates on energy, on energy storage, on food security, we are creating a real interest in that cooperation where we can be beneficial to one another. And I think it will continue to be very strongly related to the United States interest, but not totally dependent on it.
Dr.
Well, since I am not diplomat, I'll talk frankly.
Please.
Well, look, first, U.S. was and still and will be the biggest allies, at least for the Gulfies. This is a fact we cannot deny. But, and 100 line under but. Since Obama's administration, there was a shift in the strategic assessment of the U.S. towards the region, and pivoting towards Asia, and very, sorry to say that, naive thinking that by reaching the deal with Iran 2015, this region will be oasis of peace. So no need for the American in the region to solve its problem or to be the guarantor for its security. So then we can move towards China. While they are moving from the door, the Chinese came from the window to the region through the Belt and Road. And when the Americans discovered that, they came back to the region. It was a big mistake taking its troops from Iraq. It was a very big mistake and miscalculating the consequences. Pulling the troops from Afghanistan was a big mistake. When they did the deal and ignoring the GCC concerns, still ignoring the GCC concerns, it's okay. Now the ballistic missiles, the malign activities of Iran, the drones, we know that. And this is leave us nowhere and pressuring things, either us or there, either us or Chinese or Russian. Well, dealing with us as if we are still children, not grown up, and we have no will. Either you choose us or choose other. This is not the way. And you have any country, even the American, when they will choose their national interest. So this is by logic. As I said, they will be still our allies, but we are confused. We are confused about the American intention towards the region. How do you look at us? And we, after the Houthis attack, there was no condemnation from the American side. It came lately. That left a great bitterness with UAE, leadership. So now, Americans staying or not, they are not staying because of us. They are staying because of their interest, how to play a positive role in the region. There are many rooms to play a role, but not with blind eyes, only concentrating in their interest. What about the other interests whom might be the Saudi, the Emirati, all the Gulfs? They invested a lot in this relation, and it's easy just to wipe it in one day and looking to others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ambassador Karen.
We started peace with Israel many years ago, and we are the long-standing partners with the Israelis on many fronts. I'm proud to be one of those who work on this issue in Cairo, in the United Nations, and so on. But there remains challenges, and let me just give you one example of this good cooperation. In light of what is happening in terms of tunnels and so on, we have managed to reach an agreement with the Israelis actually to change the composition and quantity of forces, because there are 3 zones attached with the peace treaty, and each zone has a specific limitation on what kind of armor you can put in each zone. And because of our, am I having problems? Because of our cooperation and understanding with our Israeli colleagues, we started peace together. We have managed to move on forces actually, and through their acquiescence, these zones have been, I won't say absolved, but a better understanding has been reached between us on them on that issue. Now, that being said, the question will always remain in any peace treaty or in any incremental or whatever step between Arabs and Israel, which will be, what are you doing on the Palestinian front? This will always remain. It haunted us. Some people say that it even led to the death or the killing of President Sadat, whatever, but this will always remain the issue. And you do not and cannot sidestep the Palestinian problem and claim that we have changed history. And I'm speaking about us. I'm speaking about Egypt. That this is what we did. And actually, at one point, we were completely ostracized from the Arab world, thrown out. Remember, from the Islamic conference, Egypt was thrown out, and so on. I won't repeat what we said. And that was done because of the peace we signed with Israel. But we persevered, we insisted, and we have a good model of cooperation with the Israelis on this event. So I just hope that in this kind of a discussion, we need to keep how to broaden the compass of these very good accords between these new partners and make them make more sense to what has already been achieved before between Jordan and Egypt and so on, and add up on that. And in the same time, find a track that is very suitable and necessary to discuss the Palestinian issues, because you simply cannot ignore them and continue on the same track.
Okay. No, thank you very much.
Just one sentence.
Sure.
Give you permission. No. Can you hear
Please.
me? Is that
Yep.
okay?
All of us or only?
2 years ago,
I think it's
I was the head of the UN International Organization Division in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the European ambassador came to me, and we had a discussion about voting patterns. You know, many of you may know that there are more than close to 100 different resolutions related to Israel in the UN system. And we talked about that, and he said, you know, it would be a lot easier to support you if you solved the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I told him, why didn't I think of it?
Thank you.
My point is that I don't disagree with you that this is a huge issue. And it was mentioned by Ambassador for us, if we have been able, and this was thoroughly discussed in the previous session, to solve this. I know that this has been extremely important for Israeli, Palestinian, and the region alike.
Absolutely.
So it's not, when we are trying to work our relationship in different interests, is not instead. Quite on the contrary, we are hoping and still continue to hope that this work can be able to create a better environment for creating, maybe as Odederan mentioned, a gradual but an effort to try to improve life and then to find a solution to this. But we understand perfectly well that this is not a replacement and it is not an effort to try somehow to forget about the Palestinian issue and let's talk about, no, we understand that, so please.
No, thank you for that. And you know, this has really been a very interesting and balanced discussion in a sense because, you know, it's a positive discussion, but you also gave us, I think, each of you in a way, some more directly than others, a sense of the limitations as well and some of the other challenges. But I want to open it up to everyone here. Please do just, as you are, catch my eye, but please also tell us who you are and where you're from. And if I could go just right in the back and then a row forward of that. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for speaking and for your contributions. I'm Nick Grinstead. I'm an analyst up at NATO. I had two questions. The first was that I was struck that when discussing the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian Authority was noticeably absent. Do the panelists feel that there is a role for the Arab states, both those that are involved and those that aren't involved in the Abraham Accords, to either support or reform the Palestinian Authority, imperfect as it may be? And the second question is that, assuming Iran remains an existential threat, do Israel and the Abraham Accord states have any interest, have any desire to further military cooperation through some sort of missile defense framework or system? And if so, what would they have to offer one another? Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you very much indeed. And if I could go just forward of you.
Yes, I'm Professor Marco Mayer from Lewis University. Good morning, Ambassador. And also to you. I've been quite involved in the people-to-people Oslo implementation in '99, so it's long time ago with Ambassador Badini, and we did a lot on education between Israeli and Palestinian, and after with the Peres Center, Ron Pundak and so on. Which, so I have a experience on the ground on the difficulty of the task. I won't speak about the Israel side, which I know well with Ben Israel, Itznik and so on. I will just make a question on the Palestine. My impression is that Omar Soleiman, that was working, as you know, as the head of the Egypt intelligence, was working hard on the intra-Palestine fight, let's say, among the several factions. I'm wondering if this kind of work is the condition for going through the agreements, because if we have two entities which are so divided, I won't speak about the Israeli, but just the Palestinian now, I think it's very difficult to get a real agreement between the Israeli and Palestinian, because when I have an experience in the Balkans, when I have the Serbs highly divided, even in Kosovo, it's impossible to have an agreement with the Albanians and so on. So that's my question. What do you think about the intra-Palestinian rift and possibility of reconciliation? Thank you.
Okay. I've got quite a lot of people in the room who want to have a word, and I'm afraid if I leave all the questions to the end, it's going to be, a lot of them will get lost. But if we are all very, very brief, maybe we can just ask you to pick up on, so there's really two questions that relate to this intra-Palestinian reform question and the role of the partners in it, but then also this, you know, what can you do with Iran, against Iran, if I should say. But anyway, anyone would like to pick up on that?
To start, maybe?
Ambassador, please. Yeah. But don't feel compelled to, you know, you can save comments for the end too.
I feel already compelled. But anyhow, let me just pick up on the important question that my colleague mentioned over there. Yes, you are right. The late Omar Suleiman's main problem was how to deal with Palestinian factionalism, bringing them to Cairo periodically and trying to have them all work under one banner and so on. And unfortunately, there was always a conflict of interest. And this was a very, very difficult job for the late Omar Suleiman, whom I knew in person, actually. And I worked with him on many fronts. Unfortunately, the matter remains is that you have a problem. You have a problem inside Palestine itself. You have a problem between the PLO, between the legitimate authorities, and you have a problem with Hamas and so on. But you also have a problem of exploitation of this agreement in order to shelve the Palestinian problem. And this is what we don't want to see happen. As long as you will have this problem on the negotiating table, I do not think that there will be permanent peace in the Middle East. So the sooner you do that, the sooner you incorporate them, the sooner you have a track that is viable in this regard, I think this will be even more and more important. And we have open lines of communications, and Egypt has differences with some of these factions, including in Gaza because of tunnels and so on. So I confess this is not an easy issue, but we never give up. And you have to continue because this is your dictum as a very important partner and a peace builder and the country that signed peace with Israel, the first country that signed the peace and not only signed but respected its peace commitments with Israel from that moment from 1979 until today. And we have many cooperations and in many fronts. The person talking to you visited Israel more than 5 times. And I have many colleagues, one of them, and many friends, one of them is sitting over there, family friends. And this is not the problem or the issue is how to turn this friendship into a workable relationship so that you can get progress done at a very short period of time.
Okay, thank you very much. Ambassador Barr, or anyone, go ahead, please. And maybe to pick up on this point on Iran as well, what the partners can do.
I will be brief.
Be very
Okay?
brief.
I will be brief.
Thank you.
On the first question, it was a Palestinian reaction to the Abraham Accords and then the inter-Palestinian. I want to say something important about this, and I hope it will not sound offensive to you, but this issue has been discussed in the previous session as well. The importance of this, the inter-Palestinian, and I am not shying away from it. There is also disagreement. You all applauded Yair Lapid for saying he supported the two-state solution, but right now we have an alternate prime minister who is called Naftali Bennett, who is against the two-state solution. And the Israeli society is divided about that, okay? So my point is, we've been years in trying to say, in order to discuss cooperation between Bahrain and Israel, between Egypt and Israel, between Saudi Arabia and Israel, between United Arab Emirates and Israel, between Morocco and Israel, first we must deal with the Palestinian issue. And it didn't work. Not only it didn't work for the rest of them or for Israel, it didn't help the Palestinian at all. And right now, when we have a session about the Arab Accords and we try to understand better how it works, the question is about the Palestinian internal divide and how to solve it. There is a lot of discussion we can do about that. It's not a precondition. This is not the issue. It is simply a practical issue, whether it is possible actually to negotiate and have an agreement when the Palestinian Authority is the representative of the Palestinian and it has no say whatsoever in what's going on in Gaza. Whether it's practical with Abu Mazen at his age, at his level of reputation in the Palestinian side to be able to negotiate seriously and give up, and whether it's possible, I'm not shying away from it, whether it's possible to negotiate with the Israeli government that disagree inside itself whether it wants or doesn't want the Palestinian. So the big question for us is, what then can we do? Should we hijack everything in our region in order to try to insist that we might find a solution to the Palestinian problem, or should we try, which I think is what the Israeli government in the last year tried to do, to say we know we are not being able to have a full solution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem. Let's try to see how we can make life better, try to solve some of the most pressing issues, increase the standard of life, try to solve the financial issue, try to find better way for people to work in Israel, to deal with climate change, a different issue without solving the Israeli-Palestinian, but trying to make life a little bit better, hoping that we will be able to create some sort of an environment that maybe in the future will enable us to deal. But as long as we are stuck in the effort to try to have a discussion every time we talk about Abraham Accord, to try first of all to solve the Palestinian issue, we are stuck. then we can't speak about anything else because we will not be able to solve the Palestinian problem right now. I'm not putting it aside.
A lot of people in the room who want to get in a comment.
Okay.
So if I may.
I hope it is not offensive, but I really think that this is an important issue. One last word on Iran. I don't think that talking about military cooperation on this issue is going to be helpful, but I can say that there is definitely a lot of interest for countries in the region and maybe even for NATO to try to deal with some of the challenges that are involved with the Iran hegemony effort in the region.
Okay, thank you. And let me go right here if I could, please. And if you hear things, by the way, that you want to pick up on in the end, just keep note of them and we'll get to that, but all very brief, please.
Thank you. I'm Maurizio Melani. I'm teaching international relations, and I have been ambassador, notably in the Middle East. Now, I've been very pleased to hear the common view about the relevance that the Abraham Agreement can have on the Palestinian issue. Now, I would like to ask if there are possibility of some initiative that can be taken in this framework, both as far as the issue of the inter-Palestinian affairs, because I think that there is a role that the countries of the region can play, and also concerning then the relation with Israel. Then I have another question on another issue, and it is about the agreement which is on the way, and we hope that it can be concluded, between Israel and Lebanon, about the borders, the maritime borders between the two countries. Of course, this is very important for the development of the whole area, for recovering Lebanon, for, I presume, stabilizing the region. It's very important for us because we consider that this area, Egypt, Israel, Cyprus, I mean, it's very important for the supply of gas. Okay. And then related to this, of course, gas will be very important during the energy transition. But of course, we are all committed to decarbonization. Now, I would like to ask if in these kind of agreements, and also in the Abraham Accord, there is something which is supporting the renewable energy, hydrogen, and so on, where several countries of the region are engaged, and if this can be a framework of cooperation of the countries of the region, which can be also this helpful for us Europeans.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, and let me ask that we just, I'll give you each a very short comment in the end. You can come back to whatever you want to pick up on, so we get a chance to go around the room, right in the front here, if I could. Ambassador Trezza. The microphone is en route.
I have been asked to be very short. Yes, my name is still Carlo Trezza. I agree with you, Ian, when you said that 5 years ago it would have been unthinkable that a result such as the Abraham Agreement would take place. But they did. It was probably the only success of the Trump administration. But my question goes to Ambassador Barr. In view of a confirmation of all this network of dialogue and recognition and so on, do you think that the day might come in which Israel could decide that it doesn't need weapons of mass destruction anymore?
Mm-hmm. Okay. that will have a yes or no answer to it, I'm sure. Anyway, where are we going? All right, gentlemen there, and then over here, and then I'm conscious of our time, so.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Shahina Molaris. I'm Director of Iran Desk at ITSS Verona, and my question is particularly addressed to Your Excellencies Ambassador Belushi and Ambassador Barr. So, as you know, we keep talking about the Abraham Accords. Yeah,
for the translator, if you,
of course,
yeah.
I try to slow down. So, we keep talking about the importance of Abraham Accords, which is quite important. But I keep asking myself, How efficient can the Abraham Accords be as long as there is a threat of the Islamic Republic within the region? And at the same time that I'm talking to you, my fellow Iranians in the streets of Iran, unarmed civilians are being shot and killed. We're talking about more than 200 people in this period. And they keep minimizing us by calling us protests, whilst actually what is happening is a revolution in my country. And we are asking for a change. And I'm asking you, beside the condemning and the symbolic acts that we appreciate that, how would you help us? How could you support us? How could you support this movement, this revolution that is going on in Iran? Because yesterday, it was killing Iranian people. It was killing Lebanese people. They are suffering from Hezbollah. Israelis and even Palestinians are suffering from Hamas and Jihad Islami. In Yemen, Yemenis, they are suffering from the Houthis. In Iraq, people are suffering from Hashd al-Shabi. We have seen their proxies. My fellow Italian, Alessia Piperno, is being held unlawfully in Iran. So it is knocking on European countries' doors for quite a few years. How would you and how could you support us in this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. There was a question right here in the, I guess it's the second or third row. Thank you. And then I'm going to come back to our panel.
Thank you. Thank you, ambassadors, and everyone else in the room for coming and speaking to us.
Do speak up a little louder.
Sure. My question seeks to gain some historical insight. I'd like to know if you could share some insight as to what it was like working with Donald Trump and Jared Kushner on this agreement, and what might happen in 2024 if either he or someone like him is reelected. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Trump. So, I mean, as often happens, we get to the real stuff at the end in a way, but I'm going to come back to each of you for a final comment, but also pick up on whatever you have heard from the questions and comments that you'd like to leave us with, because I'm conscious of our time. So please, Ambassador, if we could start with you.
I think it's very important that we should not enter into war. We in the region has gone through war many times. Unfortunately for us, we always ended up unscarred, and we continued our economic development, etc. Today we are in a situation with unfortunately a government like the Iranian government, who they are meddling in the affairs of its neighbors. I mean, they are everywhere, and we can see they are in Yemen and everywhere. I think this is the responsibility of the people of Iran. The people of Iran brought Khomeini, and they should kick out also this. They are great enough to work out something which will, if they decide all of them to through this government, they will be successful. I am very confident that if they are united, they will definitely do it. This is my, I mean, intervening there, it will give the chance for this regime to fortify and to divert the attention. I think the people of Iran are great enough to take care of themselves. I think so.
Super. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Please, and very brief, please, as you can see our clock.
There were several questions, but I want to really respond to the one before the last. What is it that we can do about Iran? And I think one should be, it's a very good question that all of us should be asked. But I think the people that are sitting here are those that have been advocating repeatedly in the last several years to the Americans and to the European about the Iranian regime and the way it behaved both to its people and to the instability in the region, and the need to put the pressure on it. And right now, I think that when we say something about Iran, everybody repeatedly, you've got, in any case, you have all this interest about Iran. So, but it is time, I think, for many people to listen to the concern. This was mentioned by several of our colleagues. You haven't listened enough to what we say about the Iranian regime, because in some cases, some of the countries in the West have sacrificed all for the interest of an agreement on the nuclear file. And we thought that this is a wrong approach. And we repeatedly tried to advocate against that approach. And we organizing between ourselves to discuss and to protect ourselves, and in some cases also to be able to protect the region against Iranian aggression. That's one. I want to say something about weapon of mass destruction. Promise, I will be very short. This is a very optimistic projection, what you mentioned. The fact of the matter is that we continue to believe that the prospect of Iran in the next very few years actually acquiring a nuclear weapon is not small. It's quite big. The possibility that maybe other countries in the region, if they see that, decide also to have the nuclear weapon is also not that small. So I think the discussion of a regional free of weapon of mass destruction is the right one, but it must be when there is a regional rapprochement, a regional calm down in the situation. Last reference to the negotiation. I seriously believe that a poor Lebanon, a Lebanese crisis is bad for Israel. It's good for Hezbollah. It's good for Iran. It's bad for Israel. And therefore, if such an agreement can lead Lebanon to be able to actually have some optimism, it may take years, some optimism about energy and about neighborly, stable relations with Israel, as we are already using the gas in our territory, I think it's something wonderful. And if we have been able to contribute a little bit through this, I think it's worth it. I hope it will work.
Dr. Al-Ketbi.
I will end by saying what we are talking about, the Abraham Accord. The main target for this, that to create, this is from UAE perspective, economy is the priority. That cannot work with a region plagued with a crisis, with wars, and we have experienced conflict with Israel and war 70 years, and we did not reach any solution for the Arab or for the Palestinian. Let's try the other way. There are many, if it depends, you look to the half full or to the half empty. Wherever you stand, you will look at it. There is a chance for Palestinian to be part of that, to jump on the table and asking where we are and how can we benefit from this. But condemning this and continuing condemning this will not help. Not the Palestinian, not the Arab, not even the Israeli or the region.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Karim, a very brief last word. If we can be...
Should I use this or?
Sure.
Okay, now I'll speak on the questions of weapons of mass destruction, which I think is very important. The person talking here is the one who negotiated with the Israelis a consensus resolution in the United Nations in 1980. I negotiated with Gideon Lior, and it was passed by consensus, and for the first time ever in the United Nations General Assembly, Israel acceded and accepted the principle of the establishment of a zone, a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. Now we have an additional component, and we have a track that has been boycotted by Israel until today, which is the establishment of a zone, a nuclear weapon-free zone, including a zone free of weapons of mass destruction. If something positive were to come from the Israelis in the coming month to join this process, we have had 3 conferences until now, and I think it is very important for Israel to reconsider its position. Joining this process will not mean that Israel will go whatever in a few months. No, this is an ongoing process of confidence building between Israel and its neighbors, a process where we can discuss confidence building measures between Israel and its neighbors, and a process where we can discuss even the establishment of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction, which is in the interest of Israel and all other partners in this regard. So from this podium, I leave it to the Israeli ambassador as a request from someone who has worked with the Israelis from 1977 on this issue until today, to take this message back and to have them change their opinion and join the process in New York on the establishment of nuclear free zone, including weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed. This has really been an extraordinary discussion, and our sincere thanks to all the speakers for this. Thanks to the audience for the questions, for the comments. We will have a short break, 15 minutes for coffee, and then we'll reconvene for our, I guess, final session. But again, thank you very, very much indeed.
Very well. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So this is the last session of today's conference, and I would like also to start by echoing all the previous speakers who thanked the NATO Defense College Foundation for hosting this very important conference to tackle these pressing issues. And of course, I also would like to thank our dear friend, Ambassador Alessandro Minotto Rizzo, for always his persistence and eagerness to have a proper and fruitful and effective dialogue across the two rims of the Mediterranean and within the NATO and Arab world and beyond regions. So I know that this is the last session and that everyone is eager probably to go home or to go have dinner. So we have a very technical panel. We are going to tackle a very pressing matter, and that relates to trafficking, smuggling, whether it was in terms of humans, persons, whether it was in terms of drugs, narcotics, whether it was relating to tobacco, whether it was about money laundering. And I think that although the session is very technical, but we have to look at it in the context of what we heard earlier this morning within the two excellent panels, i.e. how can the process or the coherent process of counterfeiting, smuggling, be injected and benefit within the harmonization, high-level geopolitical forums and agreements that are being forged in the region these days. So without any further ado, we have with us three experts. All of them are doctors. And I will just introduce the name and the position that they are occupying at this time, because I think that their credentials are encrypted in the booklet that you all have. And I'll also name them in the order that they will speak. We will start with Dr. Mark McAuliffe, who is the director of the North Africa and Sahel Observatory, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. We will then move on to Dr. Amer Sabaili, who is a non-resident fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. And last but not least, we will listen to Dr. Claudia Gazzini, who is a senior Libya analyst at the International Crisis Group. And the way that the panel is going to speak is because Mark and Amer are going to give us a general overview, a broad overview about this topic, and then Claudia is going to be more specific about Libya. However, being a non-democratic moderator, I have to throw some questions at this panel, and I hope that they listen to their moderator in answering some of these questions. Obviously, from the looks of their eyes, they're not going to answer any of these questions. But anyway, the question that I'd like to start with is that in order to establish sound policies and cooperation projects, the cornerstone is to have accurate statistics. So the question is, and this is to the panel, is to enlighten us on this matter. Do we have a proper statistics on smuggling? And if we do so, who holds them? And what are they? And can we build regional coherent measures to counterfeit illegal trafficking, building on these statistics? Question number 2. Is drug trafficking, and possibly human trafficking, is an alternative way for countries to escape sanctions and economic problems affecting that country? Now, there is a theory also that says that this issue is being blessed and approved by official governments in order to have a diversion or an alternative route to escape sanctions. So we would like also to hear on this point. And thirdly, the third question, is a unification process of drug and human trafficking to counterfeit and confront this issue possible through some sort of regional cooperation that is structured in a multi-tiered levels, i.e. socio-economic, political, and security? Do we have such a thing, and do you foresee that such a regional cooperation or project could see light in the future? So the floor is yours, Mark.
Thank you. So as if the challenge of discussing this complex subject in 7 minutes is not hard enough, you added another load of weight to it. But I'll try to address also, because I think it's very pertinent and sort of rolls into the discussion we were having this morning. I'm not going to start with a lot of preambles, but one of the questions concerns statistics, which I think is a very pertinent one, or research to that effect. In the interest of time, I'm going to focus on North Africa. So by North Africa, I mean also Mauritania, but I'm going to focus mostly on that region, maybe touching a little bit on the Sahel. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to say anything very insightful or that you don't really know, but I hope to sort of gather a few thoughts together in order to provoke discussion. So starting from statistics, the net answer is no. The picture we have in a number of criminal markets in North Africa and the Sahel is extremely patchy, inconsistent. There are some states that are better than others in producing some relevant statistics of seizures, for instance, so on and so forth, but we don't have a complete picture. And I personally am very suspicious of quantitative methods applied to this region, precisely because we have a number of very, very big black holes. And in those contexts where you have such black holes, I find that applying quantitative research methods often gives you a false sense of security, where you produce something which can be purported as fact, when in fact you're very far away from reality. And when you start metering things closer to the ground, you realize that actually you're very far off of reality. So I work for an organization called the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, and I run their observatory focused on North Africa and the Sahel. What we do is look at criminal markets. We do a lot on human smuggling and trafficking. We do a lot on drug trafficking, subsidized goods, and I'm going to try and focus on these three markets only, although there are obviously other pertinent markets. So the method we use is to use a triangulation of methods, one of them relying heavily on a network of people on the ground who allow us to penetrate difficult to access areas, coupled with field work and analysis of open source. This doesn't give us a complete picture, but it gives us a very granular picture. And more importantly, we do this constantly, week in, week out. So that gives us a moving picture of the situation. So when there's a development, that allows you, that type of research allows you to place that development in a time and a space, which is critical, especially in the analysis of organized crime. So one of our cornerstone approaches to organized crime is to look at crime in relation to two dynamics. One of them is the crime score, which has to do with the level, the number of criminal markets, the type of actors, their penetration into the government, etc., etc. And the other one is resilience. This latter one is very often very much downplayed. By resilience, I mean the justice system, rule of law, civil society, critically. So if we look at the region, the situation is not good at all. At best, the best performers, Tunisia, followed by Morocco, Algeria, and Egypt. If you look at our global index, which looks at a number of factors in these countries, they're sort of more or less in the middle, scoring about between 4 and 5 in terms of criminality score, and about 4 or less in terms of resilience factors. To give you an example, a really bad country, let's say, for instance, Colombia, would have a score of 7 in criminality and 3 in resilience, so not very far off in that respect. The worst performer is obviously Libya in the context for a number of reasons. So what's changing in the region? What changes have we seen in these major criminal markets which are of concern? So the starting point is a series of very fragile states, basically. And in the past few years, what we've seen is very often an expansion and the dynamism in the markets. For instance, one of the most preoccupying events in the drug trafficking market is a flow of cocaine coming from South America using North Africa as a transit zone, boats to Europe, and a growing consumption of cocaine within the country. Another factor, again in the drug trafficking market, which is, to the best of my knowledge, well below the radar of agencies that should have it on their radar, is the explosion of consumption of prescription medication within the region. When I say it's below the radar, for the past 5 years, we've been sort of discussing this problem to anyone who will listen about this. Currently, transporting large amounts of prescription medication is not a crime internationally. But this is a growing market internally, and it fuels internal markets within these different countries, and it fuels criminal networks. So what to do? I'll be discussing this a bit further on during the question time. But basically, I find that the biggest problem we have is that currently, in respect to the relationship between the West and the region, different countries in the region, there is a major asymmetrical relationship where the West is trying to pursue security priorities in the region, typically in the field of irregular migration and terrorism. Everything is funneled through this very, very narrow prism, and as a result, the outcome is warped. And tying into the previous panel, we have a situation where major mutual threats and mutual opportunities are completely overlooked. So what I would propose, or what I'm trying to propose here, is not some soppy vision of a relationship between states where one state is constantly thinking about the interest of another state. But I'm talking about looking at the bigger picture and identifying these mutual threats and mutual opportunities.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ending. Thank you. On that note, the narrow security gateway, in contrast to a more multifaceted way of thinking to tackle this issue. Dr. Amr Sabali, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Well, actually, I'll make use of these 7 minutes to invite you all to look to this phenomena in a different way. Mark tried to cover the whole mechanism and the way, but I guess when it comes to our region, especially in the Levant, the trendy issue today is the drug industry. And it's for the first time, it's not drugs imported to the region. So it's local fabricated drugs. And this is due to so many reasons. Long crisis, as you know, in Syria, sanctions imposed in Lebanon and Syria, and then we ended up from a new way, let's say, a new way of criminality. It's not just, we closed an eye for years on trafficking tobacco in our region, and the same networks today, they are local networks working on this industry as not just as shadow economy, but also parallel economy. And this is I think, the most dangerous part of it. And from other side, if we want to look at it, I think after the failure of the declaration of the Caliphate of Daesh and the fall of Daesh, things changed a bit. So there is no In first line, we don't have terrorist groups working, but we have criminality working. But in this case, I wish that we don't do any distinction, because there is a holy marriage between the terrorist groups and those criminal groups, which means if the criminal groups today are in the front line, the terrorist groups in the back line working elsewhere. So if you look to Afghanistan, there's an emerging new emerging of power for ISIS, while in our region, drugs is becoming the most, let's say, dominating issue. When it comes to the issue of drugs today, why it is really critical to lack a joint regional cooperation on facing this trend, because we are not dealing with trafficking anymore. We are dealing with sponsored industry. For example, the vacuum in Syria, of power in Syria, made like official sponsorship as well of this industry, which ended up like not just invading the region for a source of income, but as well to be an infiltration tool of other countries. So if we want to reach the Gulf countries, if we want to reach Israel, the only thing is to make use of the moment. What does it mean? In post-COVID era, today, the political and economic frustration, it's in the peak. Economic difficulties is in the peak. So making use of this new trendy drugs, it's becoming a tool of infiltration of systems. It's they are making use of the vulnerability of the system. You have an infiltration of security system, you have an infiltration of social structure, which means a economic dependency on this industry, which will make it very difficult to deal with. So if you think that we are dealing with a phenomena that will pass by, I think we need to revise it, because behind it there is very complicated operations, very complicated networks, and there is political and terrorist goals behind, let's say, this diffusion of this trend. That's why I think in our region, the issue of chaos is becoming very trendy. Like we don't find solutions for any problem, and it's becoming very normal that we live with chaos. So we don't find a problem with Syria, and now we deal with the chaos in Syria and its consequences. I think it is the time to start thinking to face the issue of criminality today according to a regional cooperation. But in the same way we dealt successfully with the issue of countering terrorism and Daesh. So if we had an anti-coalition, anti-terrorism, we needed today to have the same expertise, the same good experience to be applied on the issue of drugs, and seeing drugs not just as limited to the issue of drugs. The second issue, I think, Mike was talking about the arrival of drugs from South America as hub North Africa and then infiltrating Europe. But I think the new trend we have, because this is a very cheap drugs that has been fabricated in the region. And it seems that it can reach everywhere because the prices is really affordable by everybody, and the efficiency is high, and there is no real health consequences like the old traditional chemical issues, which means like if the Mediterranean today, which is totally linked, is connected and global criminality is connected, I think we might witness as well a reverse movement of drugs from our region to Europe and to the southern of Mediterranean. That's why I think this needs, first of all, a regional cooperation, Gulf and Jordan. This needs as well to start realizing that without closing the open crisis, the open problems like the Syrian crisis, we will never have a solution, because simply if we don't create legal economic profits for many people who are totally benefiting today from this industry, because this industry, the moment it came to the surface, it was latent for long years. So it is rooted in the region, and we need to admit that and recognize it. And we need to realize that if they succeed today to have this efficient networks for drugs, it means that weapons are being smuggled as well. And if today they are drug dealers, tomorrow they are terrorist groups. So in order to face the coming waves of terrorism as well, we need to act today in an international cooperation regarding this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. Just right on time, and the floor is yours, Claudia.
Thank you. So Mark mentioned that Libya is the worst performer of the North African countries in terms of criminality. And he added, obviously, which of course people like us who follow Libya closely would obviously say that this is obvious. But let me explain why Libya is obviously the worst performer. What type of criminal activity do we see in Libya? I'm going to list them, not in order of how important they are in terms of market value, because we don't have statistics. Okay, so it's what is apparent to me as being big chunks of the economy, criminal activity related to these activities. We have, as many Europeans know, human smuggling crossing Libya from sub-Saharan Africa to the coasts in the north, northwest, and northeast. Also migrants coming in from the Egyptian borders and seeking to venture into Europe. As you know, over the past 8 to 10 years, the numbers have fluctuated. I remember in the Gaddafi eras, there were about 20 to 30,000 migrants crossing the Mediterranean. In the past 8-10 years, it has reached peaks of 200,000, 120, 150,000. So these are the numbers we're talking about for the Mediterranean crossing, and many more of those who actually come through the borders and stay in Libya for some period of time. So human smuggling, weapons. Weapons coming into Libya. At the time of the 2011 war, of course, Libya was a nightmare for many neighboring states because weapons left Libya. Now we're seeing weapons coming into Libya. In some cases aided by foreign states that are delivering these weapons, in others simply bought at the international illicit market. Another one is oil and refined fuels. Libya produces on a good day 1.2 million barrels of crude oil and exports most of it. But the irony of being an oil-rich country is that actually Libya imports its refined fuels. So the gas that goes in the tanks and diesel is imported mainly from Europe and partner states, because Libya has lost its refining capability. Whether this is willful loss or criminally instigated loss is another question. So Libya purchases on the international market at commercial prices diesel and fuel and imports it in the country. A big chunk of this, what this chunk is, again, is not really clear. We can do some maths, but a substantial chunk of this imported subsidized fuel is taken over by criminal gangs and either re-exported in the Mediterranean through vessels or exported to neighboring countries to the south and to the west. Because of course, let's say diesel or fuel costs $1 a liter. You can buy it subsidized in Libya at 5 cents a liter. So you can imagine the humongous profits that this creates. Others are scrap metal, a big sort of source of income. Gold in the south, medication as well, as you mentioned. For years, it was very difficult to buy medicines which are supposed to be subsidized in Libya, and people were just buying them at the black market. In reality, these were subsidized medications that criminal gangs, with the complicity of state or bureaucrats, officials, got their hands on and sold them to the private market. Drugs. Mainly tramadol, as far as I understand. When you go to some cities in Libya and you see, and it happened to me last June, and you see completely new neighborhoods mushroom, malls, lights, shops, and you ask, where's all the wealth coming from? Somewhat embarrassed people would say, well, it's a drug market that has sort of contributed to this inflow of capital, which has given rise to these new neighborhoods. So this is the reality that Libya is in. And it's by no way limited to one part of Libya or the other. As you know, Libya is divided currently, but it has over the past years been divided into sort of rival administrations, one based in Tripoli, and one in the east. But if we break it down and we look at dynamics in the west and we look at the dynamics in the east, I would say there's human smuggling is predominantly from western Libya, but this year we're seeing more and more arrivals from eastern Libya as well. Refined fuels and oil smuggling used to be, again, more predominant in western Libya through the border to Tunisia, but we're increasingly seeing it happening both re-exported through eastern Libya and exported south through eastern Libya. We're seeing weapons coming in support of armed groups or military coalitions, both in western Libya and eastern Libya as well. So what does this all mean? I mean, to conclude, I would say the lessons learned from the Libya case are the following. I mean, why do we have such a criminally or trafficking prolific country in Libya today? First point, I would say institutional division breeds trafficking. The fact that we have rival administrations that have been at war cyclically over the past years means that there's bad governance, because essentially the rival administrations are so focused in self-maintaining themselves and maintaining their hold on power that very rarely are services delivered in the periphery. And hence, you have marginal areas that are highly dependent then on trafficking or criminal activities, and at the same time, you have power centers that are complicitly and allied also with criminal gangs to self-sustain themselves. The second point is that there is an inherent complicity between the state and trafficking and traffickers, meaning state officials, bureaucrats are closely partnering in many cases with traffickers in these different fields.
And thirdly, I would say that diverging foreign interests, which in Libya have been playing out for a long time, have also contributed to the rise and consolidation of criminal activity in Libya. For example, one focus on stemming the flow of migrants of one European country has led them to close an eye on the trafficking of oil and refined fuels, and so on and so forth. So these are the lessons learned. So looking forward, what solution is there? I think there's no easy solution, because in theory, I would say you need better governance, you need a unified state, you need a unified international community, and you need to be able to hold accountable those state officials who have been profiteering from the state of anarchy. Not all of those are easy asks, but difficult to deliver on.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Well, very thoughtful and deep analysis from our three panelists. It bothers me that we don't have statistics on the issue, and I wonder why. It seems that there is a correlation between the lack of governance and probably the lack of freedoms and political diversification and trafficking. For instance, I was wondering, is this something that also go together? I mean, why don't we see this in Europe, Northern Europe? Is that something also that makes the thing flourish? So I think that you heard the three excellent speakers. We have less than 15 minutes. What I propose to do is that I'll open the floor for 3 questions so that we hear again from our speakers, and then another maybe 3 questions, and then we wrap up. If we have more time, I'll be more than happy to give you the ability to ask. So, Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much for these presentations that you have made. I mean, smuggling, money laundering, all these matters are very, very important. Especially, I mean, I know that it exists everywhere, but it has become an impediment, frankly speaking, to economic development, and impediment to the development of human resources, especially in our region, because as you said, they started to export what we call it those small tablets, which are very cheap, the Kiptagon, to the rest of and it has become rest of the region, and it has become a source of income for terrorist groups that are unfortunately sometimes recognized by the West. And therefore, I mean, you are from Western country. What you will do? I mean, you know who is doing it. You know who is fabricating it. You know who is. What you will do? Shall we just talk about it? We don't bring about a solution. We don't condemn them. I mean, this is a very, very important issue for us. Today, countries are deprived of, we don't import, for example, vegetables from a country which was a source of vegetables for us, like Lebanon. Today we don't import. Why? Because we found in the Mandarin full of Kiptagons. Millions of tablets we found them, and therefore, what is your reply, please?
Thank you very much. The gentleman at the 3rd row.
Thank you. I'm a dual citizen of Colombia and Canada. I was born in Colombia, so the issue of drugs is somewhat personal and close to me. And so this year at the UNGA, the new Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, gave, at least by Colombian standards, a historic speech condemning the war on drugs, saying that this has been the wrong path for decades and the evidence shows that it has borne no fruit. We have to try something else. So I'm interested to hear from your positions whether or not that is the panacea it seems to sound like, or whether it's not, and if it is, then what does the alternate path look like? Thank you.
Thank you. Professor?
Thank you. You mentioned all of you mentioned that the networks, the smuggling networks and trafficking networks are partly interconnected. And I would just be curious to hear whether there are some networks that are clearly overlapping and interconnected, and whether there are some that basically are not that much connected. That is my first question. I have two, if I may. And the second question, I mean, it's a follow-up of what the ambassador was asking. I mean, we're not doing anything about it, okay. But isn't it also the case that in some cases, Western policies may actually be counterproductive? And I'm thinking specifically about migration cooperation between Europe and, for example, Libya, where we are supporting someone in Libya to basically help us to prevent migration to Europe, and we don't really, do we really know who we are supporting, right? Or are they also part of smuggling networks, perhaps sometimes? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, well, we'll take 3 questions and then we'll take another round. Who would like to start?
Okay, I'm going to try and roll into the question of what to do and what is being done, okay? So, first of all, there isn't one prescription for the entire region. Certainly, if we're talking about MENA, I'm talking just about North Africa, and already within North Africa, there are completely different contexts. Libya cannot be compared to Morocco, as Morocco can't be compared to Tunisia. So, both relatively stable countries, with a security apparatus, but very different countries, different solutions. But what I mean to say by there's a problem in the way the relationship between the West and North Africa is skewed asymmetrically. What I mean to say by this, I'll give one example with regards to human smuggling in respect to Tunisia. Okay, Tunisia right now is a pressure cooker.
Is what?
Pressure cooker. It's suffering tremendously. The situation, the political situation is dire. The economic situation is even more dire. There is no hope on the horizon, and that has obviously led to a massive spike of immigrants coming onto Europe. Now, this might not sound very palatable to European politicians, certainly not Italian politicians. And for reasons I can understand, I can understand this. But right now is not the right time. If you're looking at a long-term goal, if you're looking at the relationship with Tunisia with an eye on stability, right now is not the right time to try and suppress the movement of Tunisians out of Tunisia, because the situation is already dire as it is. This is the one pressure valve that exists over there. Is it fair for Italy to assume this entire responsibility in respect to Europe's positioning vis-à-vis Tunisia? No, it's not. So then the discussion needs to be much broader than that, obviously. But that's one example. In respect to terrorism, for instance, okay? Again, and this goes to opportunities, for instance. When we say the trafficking of prescription medication, I'm going to be very brief, but this is very, very important, okay? You mentioned Captagon. Captagon is actually amphetamine. It's not Captagon anymore. What's being produced predominantly in Syria is amphetamine that's now making it to markets in the Middle East, in North Africa, and in Europe, okay? But we also have pregabalin, for instance, also known as Lyrica, which is actually a drug that's produced, which is used to treat epilepsy and medical conditions, okay? This drug now is being sold for recreational purposes, and it's being consumed significantly in Libya, but more importantly, it's being exported and now being consumed in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, etc., 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 okay? Now, currently, and I'm saying this with some frustration, we've been talking about this for quite some time now. Currently, this is viewed by a lot of Western agencies as something innocuous. This is a legal drug. up to the point where it's traveling internationally, no one can do anything about this because there currently is no recognition of this, okay? But the reality, and this comes to the overlap that we were talking about earlier, this drug is being imported by militia members who are criminal actors, mafia groups, de facto, in Libya, exported into other parts of North Africa. They are making a killing out of this, and in the process, they are becoming much more powerful. In the past 15 months, Claudia will say more about this, I mean, since the revolution, but in the past couple of years, there's been, I feel, an exasperation of this. These same individuals have become cardinal kingmakers in Libya. So now they're totally embedded. The level of state capture of criminal actors in Libya is massive. So there it becomes a question of stability. So what I'm advocating is a coalition of willing states that has a more broad, coordinated view of combating organized crime that is not just predicated on, giving capacity to securitize borders, but also looks at the economic stability of a country, also looks at the political stability of a country, and less palatable to a lot of countries in the region, also looks at civil society, freedom of the press, etc., which all rolls into one. Again, last point. This is not a soppy prescription. What I'm saying is the hard-nosed approach to combating organized crime in the region and solving some security problems is to take a holistic approach, because the current piecemeal approach is creating more problems than it's solving.
So a holistic approach, that is the main message that, Mark, you're sending out. Claudia, would you please also tackle this issue also, if you take on?
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit surprised by the comment of our Colombian-Canadian friend, because you were asking, there's a criticism to the so-called war on drugs policy. Did we get it all wrong? Well, I'll tell you, in our region, there was no war on drugs policy. So we're at a primordial state to sort of actually pushing up the issue to a level that it reaches policymakers as a talking point. It's not even a talking point. In 10 years I've covered Libya. I really don't recall any meeting in Brussels or anywhere with foreign stakeholders saying we're really concerned about the criminal, the drugs, for example. Yes, we're concerned about the human trafficking, migrants, so on, because it's a domestic political issue in most European countries. We're concerned a bit, with financial crimes, something I didn't mention. But drugs, medication, and so on is absolutely not on the horizon. So yes, I would say, I think it might be a bit premature to say we need to have a holistic approach, because I would assume there is an approach. I would just say we need to start thinking about it in a more serious way. There are no easy solutions, but certainly it should be higher in the range of priorities. Unfortunately, why isn't it higher in the range of priorities? Well, it's not a strategic threat for us in Europe, for most people in Europe. You don't win or lose elections on the basis of whether in North Africa people take drugs or gold is mined illegally on the border with Niger or the border with Chad. These are not issues that move the electorate, that move public consciousness here. So I'm saying this cynically, obviously, because unfortunately priorities at the moment seem to be human smuggling, of course. The presence of Wagner in southern Libya has raised a bit in the Wagner Russian paramilitary forces, has risen a bit in the sort of policymakers' minds because of the new threat of Russia. But otherwise, I think it will still be hard to just increase the level of concern, let alone have a holistic approach.
Amir, rooted industries and rooted kings, a holistic approach, and there is no approach to start with.
Well,
what's yours?
Yeah, all true, but let's this is a very sophisticated criminality. And the region, or at least when I talk to the Levant, they've never been dealing with sophisticated drugs industry. That's why today they are facing like new challenges. So if it's coming in fruits, soon it will come in different new shapes. Because it's already known that it comes like in the shape of fruits. And if we are talking about Kiptagan, soon you'll see that crystal meth is coming to Europe because it's much more affordable and efficient, etc. And the problem is that we have now this pharmaceutical industry that transformed to do this. And this is becoming like a tool of infiltration, not just an economic profit, because and you should see it from different ways. We are in the Mediterranean where this a huge amount of drugs are being there. So if there is a need as well to weaken European countries due to this, let's say, global crisis that we are witnessing, it might be used as a tool. That's why there is no holistic approach. There's no approach. This is true. But we have a successful model, which is the anti-Daesh coalition, the anti-terrorism. That's why I said we don't want to invent the wheel and to start things from zero. We have already a structure of anti-terrorism where it was efficient cooperation, intel cooperation, operations as well on the ground. So what you need is just to make this model successful again and efficient, targeting this, because at the end, if you want just to see it as a drug industry for economic profits, the way it is in South America, it is not. Here, there is a lot of politics as well. There is a lot of roles today. So if there is an interest to transform Jordan to be a hub today, it's not just because it's profitable to be in Jordan, but it's the way that you can weaken Saudi Arabia, you can infiltrate the Gulf, and you can send weapons to Israel, and you can make a lot of political ambition clear. And what you are doing is you are recruiting local actors who are in deeply need for this economic profit because of the frustration, economic difficulties, which means you don't have to sponsor opposition anymore, you don't have to weaken a regime, you just create your own partners from within the country by making them part of this network. And then today, you move Kiptagan, tomorrow weapons, and tomorrow you do an operation inside and you weaken the system, because actually where is corruption and economic hardship, the country is vulnerable. So if there's drugs, we have to agree that part of the security apparatus is involved in a way or another. So if this goes on, the trend will be really risky. And that's why I understand that we need to deal with it with real seriousness and again, with international cooperation. In this way, we minimize the individual, let's say, vulnerability of a country.
Are you saying that we lack leadership on this, on the international level? Do we lack leadership?
But we didn't witness till now the risky part. Like even when it comes to Daesh, just when Daesh declared the caliphate, we started to move. But all the signs were saying that it's growing, they will do, but we didn't move. Unfortunately, we are reactionist. But in this case, I guess we have a successful model, and that's why I insist it's a successful model.
Anti-terrorism
and in last May, in Rome, there was a talk about relaunching the coalition, and I think it's the time to think of it and adding this issue as well.
Okay. I tend to agree. Someone is giving me a message indirectly. I do not see any questions or interest from the floor, so I would wrap up this session. Thank you very much for...
Can I just take 10 seconds to say something quickly, which is to end on a positive note? Actually, and also I've been critical of Italy, for instance. There have been actions. There have been two actions, quite recent, one on fuel smuggling and the other one on drugs. One is called Operation Dirty Oil and the other one is called Operation Libecchio, which actually involved Spain, Italy, France, and another couple of countries. One was on hashish and the other one was on fuel smuggling. They had huge success. But as Claudia said, unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of currency within Italy to support these sort of actions. It probably went under over the heads of many voters, and these actions were not sustained within Italy, but also within Europe. No one in Europe really sustained these actions over time. So there is already a blueprint of how to do these things. We just need to, as Claudia said, get serious about it.
It seems to me that if I can wrap this session, that there is a need of action now and not tomorrow on this very pressing issue. And it seems to me that from what we can get from these three speakers, that regional cooperation or some sort of a pact needs to be formulated as soon as possible before we end up facing repercussions that are too late to handle. I would like to thank on your behalf, and again, if I may say that probably this is a message to the NATO Defense College Foundation to put it in your papers and also to make some suggestions to the stakeholders in this context, and obviously that we need to act collectively very soon. May I, on your behalf, thank our three speakers, and if you join me in thanking them for their excellent contribution. يعطيكم العافية, as we say. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, just one last word. First of all, I wish to thank whatever you like. You can sit, you can do whatever you like. The conference is finished. I thank you all for having me here for a long day, because it has been a long day. I have learned a lot of things. I don't know you. I learned a lot of things, including the last panel, because the issue that you have been discussing is not something very usual. I say it's not on the first pages of the newspaper in general, but it's very important. In every conference, we try to put a chapter on this, because we think it's part of the overall strategic and political scenario. I thank you all for having been here all day, and I hope that you have enjoyed the discussion, which I think has been very rich. So grazie mille e buonanotte a tutti.